All right, great. Well, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to those streaming in here, and also thank you for joining. If you would be listening in posterity when this is recorded and made available, I know some could not join. This is a Friday morning or afternoon, busy ones, of course, for many of us who are trying to juggle home, work, and life together. But this is Friday. So, and we are going to conclude in a couple of hours. This is the penultimate hour. I think a very, very important topic about risk and resilience. Our two friends here, Andrea and Maya, have done really great work in the, I'd say, many years, but this year specifically putting together the research in a white paper. This was specific to this topic, and we wanted to make sure this gets highlighted. The work that both have done are going to be extremely meaningful, not only for the cyber future of industry community, but for the respective business as well as for the broader. I think from an ESG plus T standpoint, this has been a phenomenal year in terms of technology and digital innovation. When we talk about human resiliency, we see the technologies that we have put in place are going to bounce us back to keep us together and also spring us forward. In this summit, we had so many intense and very fascinating learnings all along, especially starting this today with the whole global cyber hour with some of our members from Singapore to San Francisco. It was fascinating. This is going to kind of cherry on the top, making sure this is visible and bright and red. So the next 20 minutes are for our friends Andrea Monin-Blanc and Dr. Maya Bunt joining us towards setting this stage up. So to you, Andrea and Maya, off you go.
Thank you so much, Val. It's a real pleasure to be here in the penultimate hour. I like that. And I'm really delighted to be here with my good friend, collaborator, co-author, and all-around adventurer in the cyber world, Maya Bunt. So I'm going to kick off, and then I'm going to introduce Maya, and she's going to talk a little bit about some of our findings from our white paper. But basically, what we set out to do was to look at what does cyber resilience mean in the context of what has become really important topic in recent times, which is ESG reporting. For many of you, environmental, social governance reporting and activities, especially in the investor world, have really increased dramatically over the last few years, especially in the US, but certainly in Europe before that. And there are reporting requirements that have been imposed through regulations on companies in Europe. And increasingly, there will be more regulations also across the world. And so we set out to look at cyber and whether cyber should be part of such reporting, because we think that the regulators and governments are inevitably going to start looking at cyber external reporting, such as ESG reporting, to look at the resilience of companies. And so we set out to do our research. We looked at a number of different board members and executives who we surveyed. We collected their information, and we decided to put it all in a white paper. So speaking about the larger context that this all fits in, when we're thinking about the cyber world, it's really part of the world of risk management, enterprise risk management, resilience building. And right now in the world of pandemics, of course, we have this perfect storm of things that have happened, and cyber resilience has become even more important because of the changes in the workplace and the increased attack vector that everybody's experiencing, from the healthcare sector to manufacturing to others, government basis. So what I wanted to just give is that big picture of cyber resilience reporting really fits into this idea of ESG reporting. I'll talk about this ESG plus technology concept a little bit later, but it's ESG reporting. Should there be cyber resilience reporting? What is cyber resilience? And we have a handy little definition that we put in there, which is the organization's ability to sustainably maintain, build, and deliver intended business outcomes despite adverse cyber events. And it includes organizational practices that need to be comprehensive and customized to each organization, including the supply chain. And they need to have formal and properly resourced information security programs, team and governance that are effectively integrated with the rest of the organization's enterprise risk management, crisis management, business continuity, and education training. So with that, I want to introduce my good friend Maya, who is the head of digital and cyber for Swiss Re. Our white paper was published by the Swiss Re Institute, and it's available. Anybody can download it anytime, anywhere, online if you Google it. And really, Maya has a long career of really doing some wonderful work, starting as an environmental scientist way back when she first started. But basically now she's heading up the cyber and the strategy, digital strategy for Swiss Re, as well as a board member for several companies and banks, and a mother and a friend and a co-author. So Maya, why don't you take it away and start telling us a little bit about our takeaways from the white paper?
Thank you so much for that introduction, Andrea. I'm sure only half of that is true, but I'll take it anyways. Good. Yeah, I'll jump right in because we don't have that much time. But I just want to highlight basically 4 main findings out of that paper. So the first and foremost finding that we had, that everybody that we interviewed was of the opinion that cyber resilience is extremely important to for a company to be able to generate sustainable earnings. So that goes hand in hand with, for example, the global risk report from Allianz, goes hand in hand with the global risk report from the World Economic Forum, where cyber risks and that hand in hand with business interruption risk are on top of the line, right? So these are risks that companies, leaders are really worried about, and where everybody that we talk to actually acknowledged, yes, this is important. We have to have our digital resilience under control in order to be able to function in the future, even more so than now. So that was the first really, I think, hard finding that we had, which fits with what we see if we look at the risk side of things, right? But it's not always acknowledged as such. So this was the one of the outcomes really of our interviews. Having said that, obviously a lot of decision making, and if you look at any company from the outside, actually should take in our view, and that was our hypothesis, right? Should take a stance towards cyber resilience into account, right? And that is the second finding that we had from interviewing leaders on a global scale, is that the agreement that right now this transparency on where any organization stands in terms of their cyber resilience is not given. So on the one hand side, we have this one factor that is super important to generate those earnings, sustainable earnings. And on the other hand, we have a lack of transparency. So this is already kind of was in a way was what we set out to prove. So it was our initial ingoing hypothesis were basically confirmed, but the question is really what to do about it. And this is where we then took the story and the history a little bit of ESG reporting, and Andrea's going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, to the front to look at what could we learn from that. And here the one thing that kind of stuck out, and again it came out quite clearly in the interviews with everybody that we met, was that if we now were reporting, and obviously there's also risks to that, so I don't want to kind of go over that, but if we were reporting on cyber risk, that would not only generate benefits for the public, or the public that is informed, the transparency that is given to stakeholders, transparency that is given to potential investors, but it would also generate some benefits for the company itself. And that was quite surprising to me, because I was going into these interviews always having in my head, companies don't really want to show too much. There is a certain risk associated to that. You definitely don't want to, show where your vulnerabilities are, how much you invest into your cyber resiliency, in order not to make it easier for criminals or other adversaries to basically make use of that information, right? I was quite surprised, and Andrea, maybe you talk about that as well, whether you felt the same, but I was surprised that we got so much feedback in a way that it was that, well, yes, but there are, these additional beneficial points for that company, and they could be in different areas, right? On the one hand side, you have potentially could generate more trust with your partners, with your stakeholders, through that transparency and through that notion that, yes, there is a company that takes cyber resilience very seriously and is doing something about it. And on the other hand, this external view and the external talking about it and the discussions that one then has with, suppliers, partners, clients, customers, investors, and so on, actually creates more of a security culture and puts this topic of cyber resiliency much more in the focus and in the minds of everybody in the organization itself. So from the C-suite down to every level of the organization, actually, that can contribute highly to an increased cyber resilience culture in the organization. So that's the third point, right? And then the fourth point really is a little bit of a kind of outlook or something, looking into the future, because right now we don't have any reporting, no self-reporting, no kind of independent reporting. And we were looking at, different factors and concepts of what could be reported. But it is our clear understanding that there needs to be a lot of work that needs to go into finding the right framework for this reporting, the right level, the right metrics that on the one side generate this transparency that is so utterly needed for so many stakeholders out there, and on the other hand does not endanger the company itself. So I think there is a lot of work to do, and actually our proposal is that the industry takes that into their own hands, does not wait for some regulatory bodies or to come in and take that decision away from them. So that is actually our call to action, so to speak, at the end of the paper, is to start that discussion about how that such kind of transparency creation could look like in the future. Back over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Maya. You summarized a long paper very nicely, hitting the main points. And anybody who reads the paper, you'll see the nuances of the answers that we got from the 20 board members and executives from around the world that we interviewed for this. And the thing that was most surprising to me was the fact that there was so much consensus on the idea that this was necessary, that it was important. It was really more about the devil being in the details of the metrics and what it is that people would reveal because of the vulnerability issue. Cyber is different from environmental and social and governance issues in the sense that if you say too much, you're opening your kimono and you're going to be attacked. So there has to be a balance and a nuance, and we kind of captured that in the subtitle to the piece, which was Transparency Imperative or Security Nightmare. And it's both. And so there's a delicate road that needs to be walked. And there's some organizations that have started looking at what kinds of questions can you ask that would then become publicly available information. And they have to do with, the components of resilience. What have you created? What is the board doing? What is executive management doing? Is it integrated into enterprise risk management? Not all the details of the numbers and the attacks and the various things. Are you taking care of things like training and education and cyber hygiene, all these things that create a sort of a resilient life cycle within the organization? So I think, and then the last point I think I would like to make, echoing what Maya just said, is our impulse to write this is to say, this is coming, and it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So it's better that business and industry and also private public collaborate on finding those metrics and coming up with something that's sensible, that's rational, that doesn't expose organizations to danger before something gets passed by a regulator somewhere that creates vulnerabilities and exposure to the industry or to the company. So I think those are some of the things that we covered in our piece. I do want to sort of take it back to the bigger picture for a moment of ESG reporting and board oversight, because those are two really important parts of what we discuss and what we think this whole resilience piece is about. And on the one hand, the board oversight piece is extraordinarily important, making sure that there are tools and oversight perspectives that your board of your company is capable of exercising and receiving in terms of internal reporting. This is really important, and there's some very good material that has been produced over the last few years. The one I'm most familiar with, but I know Maya has also worked on something in Europe, but the one I'm most familiar with is the NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors here in the US. They've created a handbook together with the Internet Security Alliance. Larry Clinton, a friend of many of you, I'm sure, has really sort of developed a very robust handbook for boards. And the whole resilience piece really depends heavily on that governance piece, in my opinion. So I just wanted to add that. And then last but not least, the ESG history is sort of really accelerating now, and I think it has a lot to do with the times that we're in. We have what people are calling an alphabet soup of reporting regimes out there, which makes it very complicated. So here comes cyber as a potentially new item that needs to be reported, and still we have an ESG world that has not really figured out which one is the best kind of reporting. We have the Global Reporting Initiative. We have UN Sustainable Development Goals. We have other kinds of standards, PRI. PRI has actually done work in this area that we quote them in our white paper. So there's a lot going on, a lot of moving pieces, but we think that cyber is going to be part of those moving pieces. And the sooner organizations can become resilient internally so that they can then report externally properly and transparently, the better off I think they will be from a resilience and their stakeholders from a value protection standpoint. Maya, I don't know if you wanted to say anything else, but I think we're coming close to our deadline of 20 minutes here.
So no, I totally agree to everything that you say.
Well, I hope somebody will disagree with us soon. There's Val to the rescue. Yeah, so Val, I think we've covered the high points of our piece and of the work that we've been doing recently. I'll just add one last sort of thing, which is a piece that I've written that's also part of a book that I wrote, where I've suggested, in addition to ESG, we add a T to this equation of reporting, and that's where cyber would fall in ostensibly. Which is for technology and technology issues which are not properly accounted for within the ESG frameworks that we now have. And there's many other technology issues like AI ethics and drone technology and nanotechnology and everything else you can imagine. But that's just an additional sort of thought that people should think about when they're thinking about cyber reporting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Andrea. Thanks, Maya. This is a great way to tee off not only this conversation, but also I think the overall board and executive C-suite commitments that we have from a global perspective at Cyber Future Foundation, the work that you have done, of course, several years, but especially this piece of work is going to be, taking this to the fast lane. So with that, let me go expand this discussion to include two really esteemed panelists, and we'll add voice to this topic. Let me let me introduce Siobhan Gorman, who we recently met. Since we met, I've had a chance to catch up on your really great work in the past and as we are doing now. And also let me welcome our good friend Denise Anderson from Health ISAC. I still can't get out of NH ISAC, but that's stuck in my brain, I'm sure, with many. But healthcare security being such a big fundamental part of entire humanity is essential in the front end. So welcome you both. Maybe just with a quick introduction, Siobhan, with you, and then we go to Denise, and then we'll circle back around the panel.
Great, Val. Thanks so much. I'm Siobhan Gorman. I am a partner with the Brunswick Group based out of Washington, D.C. I co-lead our cybersecurity data and privacy practice. And Brunswick is a strategic communications and advisory firm that is global in reach. So I love the fact that this is such a global event. In our cybersecurity and privacy practice, we help companies both prepare for and respond to potential cyber incidents. And my background is as a reporter. So I spent 17 years covering intelligence and national security issues for the Wall Street Journal and other publications. Ended up covering cybersecurity way before it was cool. So I've been following this as an observer for quite some time. And I'm really looking forward to today's discussion.
Thank you, Siobhan. Denise.
Thanks. Thanks for having me again, Val, and it's great to be on an esteemed panel with all of my friends. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm Denise Anderson. I'm the president and CEO of the Health ISAC, Information Sharing and Analysis Center, formerly National Health ISAC. The reason we changed our name actually was because of global. We have a global presence, and so we thought national just kind of, we took that out of the equation, basically. But I'm also chair of the National Council of ISACs. And so for those of you who are not familiar with ISACs, Information Sharing and Analysis Centers were set up since 1998 to have private sector share information with each other around threats, vulnerabilities, mitigation strategies, and best practices. And we focus on the various critical infrastructure sectors that are important for carrying out the welfare and security, economic, health, you name it, of various countries, and in particular the U.S., where many of the ISACs were formed. Of course, there are global ISACs now, and it's very important for us to all be sharing together because we're all one. Cyber doesn't stop at a border.
Yeah, absolutely, Denise, and thank you for the great work you do, and the whole ISAC movement you started, even before Health ISAC. So thanks for your contribution. Well, let me go back to you, Siobhan. Maybe start with your thoughts on. You heard two of our distinguished colleagues here and friends talk about the whole the communication aspect in terms of what to include, right? But to shape up that communication, whether during crisis or even before, right? We do roundtable, so we do tabletop exercise and then many other activities. But I would like your candid opinion on where to start from and what would you suggest the boards to think about when you think about risk and resilience.
No, I think it's a great point, and I was so happy to hear about the idea of incorporating cyber resilience into ESG, because one thing that we struggle with when we're working with companies is to give them some sort of analogous issue to that gives them a better lens into how to be thinking about cybersecurity and cyber governance in their organization. And it's so critical that companies think about resilience well ahead of time, particularly given kind of the whole spate of ransom attacks that we've seen. We've responded to quite an explosion of them since everybody kind of shifted to work from home, which was a predictable outcome and one that many companies could have been more prepared for if they had been thinking about it in advance. And so I think that for companies to have more of a framework that says, okay, well, this is what the expectations are, and this is kind of what the reporting framework should be, that you can report on training and things like tabletops or educating your employees or all the kinds of things that we know will help companies be more resilient and mitigate the potential effects of one of these types of attacks. I think it's such a critical step to take. And And I think Maya's point about thinking about, how much you can say that isn't going to paint a target on your back is really important. And so, again, I think that creating incentives for companies to prepare and to continually prepare is an incredibly valuable thing. And it is also really important to think ahead of time of not only how much do you say in your kind of annual or regular reporting, but you say actually during an event. And part of the value of preparing, putting together playbooks for kind of crisis management and certainly the communications piece of it, if you do that in advance, it gives you the opportunity to think through on a sunny day in April, or if you're in DC, a rainy day in October, what it is that you could say to demonstrate confidence. You have a pretty limited set of details you can actually share about the incident at the time. And so it's really important to have the space and time to think that out ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the communication piece and the preparation towards that, whether during a crisis, if you learned it then and there, but many of them are going through that. That's a realistic, kind of picture right now, right? A lot of them are really learning right on the go. And thanks for emphasizing the preparation towards it, that you can actually do that. And in fact, during this last 24 hours or 36 that we have gone through the summit, I had to prepare for a board presentation, condense down 48 or 50 out, pages of technical data into one page, and that is how much time we get. Andrea and Maya probably know that, that is how much time we get with the board, and there's the fiduciary responsibility to assess that. But I think what we are learning as we go, and I'll come to you, Denise, after this, is that that is a board resiliency as well, right? The governance, it's not the technical resilience you need, the organizational resiliency starts from the top. So as the board and the senior manager are learning this on the fly, they're also to resilient in this space and manage the risk accordingly, work together. And I think there's a lot of conflict also between, who manages what, who reports, where does cybersecurity risk mitigation and governance lies. That was a question I got asked this morning coming before this coming to this summit. I had this call with an audit committee. It says that, do you think we're doing the right thing? I mean, there is no right answer yet, right? Yet, I would say, is probably the most hopeful word that you can use. But when it comes to actually taking that and acting upon it, which many of us are going through, I think information sharing is just extremely important, because that's kind of sometimes the leading indicator of what's going to come to you in your sector or otherwise, or sometimes it's you are the victim and you have to go share with others, so that the overall infrastructure is protected, right? So Denise, you have had this whole career in sharing information and enabling the industry. So please share your thoughts about what would you think in terms of risk and resilience from the top down.
So as I was listening to Maya speak, the 4 points, it actually put a thought in my mind about there are different levels of reporting. And I think when it comes to learning from each other and actually protecting the ecosystem, the ISACs are a perfect vehicle for a certain level of reporting, and that is the trust factor, where you can really open up the kimono, as was mentioned before, and share what actually happened to you so that others can learn from the experience. And I find too often a lot of organizations hide behind different reasons of why they can't share, and that only is a detriment to the organization they come from themselves or from other organizations in that ecosystem. Because when you cannot share with each other and open the kimono and say, hey, look, we got taken down and here's what we went through, then nobody's going to benefit from that, and the bad guys win, right? Every time. So it's really important for us to have the courage and the conviction to share with each other. It's really interesting because there's, I'm not sure if you're aware, but there was an alert put out by DHS and FBI and Health and Human Services on Wednesday around a particular threat to the healthcare sector. And it's been in the news lately. And we're kind of dealing with that right now. But on our, in the platforms where our members share with each other, there's been a lot of back and forth around this very topic about opening the kimono and how important it is. And that it's not a name and shame, or, a person needs to feel like a finger's pointed on them. My other thought too is there is a tendency by others to treat the victims as the bad guys. And I think we need to change that perception and that culture, because that will enable more sharing. at all the various reporting levels.
I think that I see many of us see the top to bottom, bottom up, like, and both top down. And I think, from an information sharing angle, you have a pretty good established traffic light protocol as to what you can share and cannot share, what should be shared in what areas of trust. I think those enable us to make the determination, and I think also informs, right, when you talk about board and governance and making decisions accordingly, also enables to us to have very objective way of sharing, so that we don't kind of go against the tripwire of any regulation, which I think are essential to a great extent to keep us together and to set a standard baseline, but also be able to share the information that we need at the right level, right? The condensing those 50 pages into 5 bullets that the governance team and the board are going to be acting on or advising the management are going to be essential, and that needs to be done. So with that, let me bring the conversation up to the full panel here. Let's start with Andrea. You introduced us to the concept of ESG plus T and emphasized it with the work that you did, Maya and you together. What do you think the highest level of organizations should ask for in this moment, right? Because it's so technical, so deep, but also nuanced in terms of what these organizations are.
Well, we've been saying this for years now, and it bears repeating, especially this year with this perfect storm of ESG and T issues that are strategic risks, basically. And that is that boards are not equipped to deal with this issue. And they haven't been equipped to deal with ESG either. So one of the real failures, I think, at the board levels of most companies, not all of them, clearly there's some good examples out there, but generally speaking, until recently, and maybe for a while to come, boards are made up of basically CEOs and CFOs who don't think about all of these other issues that are surrounding their world, that are part of their situational awareness and should be part of their situational awareness, whether it's environmental, social, governance, or technology. And so by not having the right people on the board or the right agendas, they're not thinking and factoring these things in, which, if they did, would help to factor in resilience overall, preparedness, as Shaban was saying, having that crisis preparedness. You can't have a crisis management plan that and a PR and external relations plan that kicks off when there's a crisis if you don't have everything underneath that iceberg. If you don't have the risk management, the resilience, the business continuity, the tabletop planning, all these things, the cyber culture that you want to. If you don't have those things underneath the surface, when the crisis happens, you're going to have a pretty bad show for your stakeholders and others. And so I think the idea, going back to the cyber resilience reporting and ESG reporting generally, is really a backhanded way of building resilience in the organization. And the board has a critical role, but because they don't always have the right people, it hasn't happened. Maybe this year, with the pandemic really obliterating all kinds of things, maybe that's, and cyber sort of following right behind. And we're not talking about climate, but it's happening too.
Yeah.
Maybe boards will wake up to the need to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's a call to action for every board at this point, just because there is so much that we could use in this moment. Leadership, right? I mean, leadership and stewardship of getting us out of this pandemic, both economically as well as health-wise, those two aspects put together, right? And the data, we talked about data yesterday, Andrea, and you will see probably more and more. So when it comes to Denise, we are looking at a very granular data of what's happening and quickly distilling that to action, right? That the management can take action on. I think it doesn't even go to board at that point, but it does, right? At some point, we're talking about how fast can data reach whom and the decision makers. So, excellent point, Andrea. Let me move to Maya. You, in terms of actually making it happen, I think you not only have the visibility into the board, but also you are creating the services and solutions that are going out to protect, right? I mean, to manage the risk, so to speak. So your thoughts on building up what Andrea mentioned.
Yeah, no, I think there were really, thank you, Val, and I think there were really important points mentioned already here. I would like to make 2 points. So the first one is we are talking here, or our session is called Cyber Resilience and Risk Management. that for me says a lot. 2 years ago, I was the odd duck out that was always talking about resilience, right? This weird woman from insurance talking about resilience. So I think even the fact that this is totally normal now, that we take, you know, a holistic view and look at resilience, which has so many more aspects to it, and looks at the company itself, looks at the business model in different ways. I think this is really important, and it's totally normal by now. So this is an extremely good development, I think, which I highly value. And I think now we have reached a starting point. So from here, we can build up the rest, right? So that was the one thing that I see, and that helps us with the whole risk management concept from you know, risk avoidance to the end, which in my view is the risk transfer, right, or acceptance, depending on. So that's the one side. But I also wanted to make one point to the board. In Switzerland, boards not only have the role of oversight, they also set the strategy. Mm-hmm. And I think this is an extremely important aspect as well. Whoever sets the company strategy needs to do so with cyber resilience in mind already. It has so many impacts on, you know, what technology is going to be used, what kind of services are going to be offered, how a crisis or a pandemic is going to be, you know, weathered through. All these, you know, from short to mid to very, very long-term impacts of those decisions, all of them have to have, you know, to be taken with cyber resilience in the background, or, you know, even in the foreground, right? People need to talk about this, and I think that still gets forgotten sometimes. Yeah. It's still, you know, a little bit of an operational topic. We need to make sure that we have the crisis under control. We have, you know, we are prepared. That is understood by now mostly, but I think there is a huge point here to be made for including that into the strategic discussions, because the question of how, you know, you produce your services or your products, how they look like, there we need to already take this into account. And if I can make, you know, one last point here today, this is the one, and that is truly important. Cyber resilience is a strategic topic.
Yeah, no, I think really good point. And you know, we are talking about really mature organizations who have actually some level of organization and board structure and management all working together, hopefully in quite unison to provide the shareholder value that they're looking for, and based on the different country regulations. But Maya, we also have talked about before about the small and medium businesses, which are not necessarily small and medium risk, right? They have a larger risk. And I'll come to you after this, if we get time, come around to talk about that aspect. So keep thinking, but do pay attention to the next speaker. I think, Siobhan, I'll go to you quickly next in terms of how do we make this communication happen, right? I mean, what are the 3 or 5 elements that you would want the organization to look for? And this could be any level, right? It could be Denise feeding in the threat intel from bottom up in the operations side, or it could be, you know, someone reading a Wall Street Journal and learning that their company got hacked. That has happened too, right? So
it does. Yeah, so I guess I would maybe make 3 points on that front. But one thing that I wanted to come back to just very briefly was the point that Denise made about sort of not victimizing the companies who have been hacked. And I come at this from 2 perspectives. One, a reporter who absolutely victimized plenty of companies when I, you know, would write about the fact that they had some sort of incident. I'm sure that they felt that I was doing that, right? And so sometimes I'll tell people, well, I went from being part of the problem to part of the solution, helping companies figure out how to respond to these types of things or not find themselves in that position in the first place. And so kind of looking at it more from the corporate perspective, you know, companies face a number of challenges. The first being the fact that cyber is one of the few sort of criminal situations that companies find themselves in where they get blamed when it happens. And I think I absolutely agree that that's something we have to change. I also worry that it's going to take a long time to change that. And so it's important for companies to understand that when they find themselves responding to these kinds of things, that is going to be the assumption. And unfortunately, that's actually why ransomware works so well, because companies will pay simply because they don't want to be embarrassed by having a hacker splay all of their data online. And so, you know, it's one, something that absolutely has to be changed, but two, sort of an unfortunate reality that we can't ignore when companies are preparing for these kinds of things. So switching over to Val's question around sort of the top maybe considerations to take into account when you're planning for these kinds of things. You know, I guess maybe 3 lessons from having worked with a lot of companies in this space. The first is that preparation is absolutely invaluable. You know, making sure that you are doing the scenario planning, getting processes in place, and making sure that you're setting expectations internally as well. I mean, I have been on any number of sort of initial calls with corporate leaders, CEO on down. They've just had a breach, and you know they're immediately turning to the forensics guy and saying, "Well, tell me what happened." And the forensics guy can say like 2 things, and one of them might be, "I'm not really sure." And the CEO will get very frustrated because all of a sudden they're either having you know, pressure from business partners or customers, you know, to explain what's happening, and there's a lot of frustration there. So both making sure you have the processes and sort of internal functions in place, as well as setting expectations with leadership that they may have to communicate externally. It may not be a media statement, but it may be to key stakeholders, that they're going to have to do that without much to say. And so thinking through that in advance is really useful. You know, in terms of the actual response, I guess I would have 2 additional points. One is that you get credit, companies get credit now for responding with speed and transparency to one of these incidents. And the easiest way to make sure that your incident is either kind of largely ignored by the media or it's sort of a one and done kind of one-day story is by sort of responding quickly and being as transparent as you need to be to sort of establish credibility that you're handling it without being fully open kimono about, you know, what all has happened. And so striking that right balance is a way to respond. The last thing I would say is just that from what I've seen, coordination internally is reflected externally. And so organizations that have a tight team that has practiced responding together and really has that muscle memory of working together on perhaps a range of crises, but particularly cyber crisis, will demonstrate confidence and competence externally almost quite naturally and probably somewhat deliberately if they've thought it through ahead of time.
No, I think excellent points that we see every day. And Siobhan, thanks for emphasizing on that. At least the first point in preparation should not go without being noticed, that, you know, should be prepared. You cannot be over prepared for these type of situations because they change. The more you raise the baseline of preparation, the more incremental change that you can accommodate in your business, right? So thank you for that. Denise, let me go to you in terms of, you know, again, share, I think, based on whatever you've heard here. And also if you can throw some light on the granularity information versus, I think what I would couch this is, you know, with your information sharing, maybe, you know, you and this is we do for a living, you may be stopping millions of actual incidents versus the few that people actually get to see, right? And that is the iceberg that's hidden, that needs to be visible in terms of what are the different types of data that would come out and you could share. So throw a little bit of light of broader impact of information sharing and also how it helps resilience from a top-down view.
So we have a phrase for that. One person's defense becomes everyone else's offense. But I was going to say, one of the things I was going to, as I was listening to the conversation going on and was going to kind of throw out there was, I would almost propose that we should call it operational resilience. And the reason I'm saying that is because I think you need to figure out what are the widgets that you're producing as an organization? Why do you exist, right? And when you figure out what that is that essential service that you're delivering and what needs to happen when everything else hits the fan? And in the case of healthcare, for example, it's patient care, right? Making sure that patients are treated and stay alive. And so what you have to look at that and say, what do we absolutely need to do to make sure that that essential service happens? And it could be a cyber, absolutely, right? If they don't have access to images or to machines that are actually delivering patient treatments, that obviously is something that needs to be taken into consideration, as well as having a sterile room from a physical perspective, or where cyber can impact physical. So I think, we need to look at it from the perspective that what is that core function that we deliver, and then spread out from there and shore up your defenses based on that. But I think also with information and sharing and planning, and I agree with all the points you made there, Siobhan. I think they were very excellent. And exercising is so important. Having that right team in place, right? And communications and transparency is so important. Making sure that everyone is aware and educated about the incident so that they can speak to it and speak to their constituents appropriately, whoever they may be, whether it's someone in the customer service center, or if it's an actual person within the technical team solving the problem, whatever that may be. And there's many lessons learned from that, like when I was in the financial sector and we had the DDoS attacks of 2012, 2013. They ended up, everyone poured onto a bridge all at once, and it created a lot of confusion, and they ended up creating different bridges for different constituents to make sure that the right people were on and they could deal with the problem efficiently. So I think that's really important to really have that nailed down beforehand. And yes, every incident is different, and you're going to learn from every incident. Again, after action is another very important thing, making sure that you capture lessons learned from an incident so that you can be better the next time. I think are all components that people need to be mindful of as they're trying to work through an incident or trying to prepare for one that hopefully won't happen.
Important points. Yes, of course, Andrea.
Yeah, at the heels of both Siobhan's and Denise's comments, I just wanted to add a couple of thoughts that are part of this picture. I think one is some of what Siobhan was referencing really goes to the point of reputation risk. If you don't have the preparation, the crisis management, the scenario planning, the board involved, all this stuff that you really need to have underneath the surface before something bad happens, there's not just financial consequences, there's reputational risk consequences that can cost an additional amount of money. And I think cyber risk incidents have a potential to be even more costly than some other kinds of incidents. And so that's one thought that I just wanted to throw out there. And then secondly, based on some of the things Denise just said, I like to call it organizational resilience, because it's about the organization working like a clock, having all the right pieces in place. And it starts with governance, and it continues with the culture. And you can apply this to cyber, you can apply it to other things. It continues with knowing what your stakeholders are expecting of you. Like Equifax's stakeholders, including yours truly, didn't expect my stuff to be out there, right? So stakeholders, then knowing what your ESG and technology issues are, and having that as part of the strategy. Someone mentioned that earlier. Having that metrics to the data collection, having the crisis preparedness, and then the last thing that Denise said, which is this self-awareness and improvement and continuous improvement, and lessons learned, and putting that back into your system, not forgetting about your incident and then having it happen again. That's all part of that sort of gears of a clock of a resilient organization. And not a lot of organizations think that way until they maybe have one of those big incidents happen to them. Maybe Equifax is in great shape now because of their incident. But I'm just saying that I think it has to happen, as Siobhan has often said today, it has to happen before. It's not, the damage is done when there's lack of preparation.
Val, could I chime in for 1 second?
Please do, yes.
Another thing that I was thinking about was the fact that it may not even be an incident that happens to you. It could be an incident that happens to one of your suppliers, right? Or people that you're connected to in some way. And so you always have to be situationally aware of what's going on and the impacts, potential impacts to your organization, and how to mitigate against them. So that's another factor. It's like we can't just be myopic and look at our own enterprise. We need to be looking at others and the ecosystem writ large to help protect ourselves.
Siobhan, go ahead. I think I would like to hear So thank you, Denise. I think that's extremely important point, that we are so reactive. We are reactive to ourselves and our being and our organization, right? So Siobhan, what do you see in terms of people getting prepared, or your thoughts around people getting prepared from other incidents that they see in public? Does that trigger an action?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually critically important to be watching what is happening to other companies, what's happening in your industry, what's happening in sort of analogous industries. In fact, as sort of an extracurricular activity, if you will, I work with the Defending Digital Democracy Project at Harvard. And one of the things that we were watching, and they focus on election security. And one of the things that we were watching was, okay, there's this spate of ransomware happening to companies, to cities, all kinds of stuff. So then what are the implications, right, for the election sector? So it's if you start watching, it's almost an early warning system, and you're lucky if you're not part of the early warning system, but rather you can take advantage of the fact that others are experiencing something and start to factor that into your planning. It's almost hard to count the number of companies we've now worked with, since March or so that, they didn't necessarily have sort of the like making your ransom decision checklist, right? Think about your strategy in advance. Are you negotiating for time? Are you negotiating because you're actually going to pay? Are you not going to negotiate at all? Are you going to ignore it and either hope it goes away or just accept the consequences and try to restore from backup? Thinking through some of these things in advance are really, really important. If you think there's a chance that you may negotiate for time and ultimately pay, or just decide that you're going to pay, can you get Bitcoin? Or are you going to vet the people who you're dealing with, potentially these hackers, to make sure that you don't have, a sanctions issue on your hand, given the guidance, particularly that the U.S. Department of Treasury just put out. So, making sure that you are keeping an eye on the various dynamics that are going on, and thinking about how that applies to your business, how that applies to your industry, is just critically important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, being watchful, situationally aware, and also taking that, being, observant of what's going around you and what will be the implication from outside. I think that would probably be getting you on the right footing to prepare, right? Because I think the preparation itself is going to be so crucial, but nobody would be there yet. I mean, very few are there yet.
Yeah. And actually, one other thing that I would add that you just made me think of is, one other thing that we've seen, especially over the last 6 months, is companies being completely surprised that they got hit by one of these things, because there has been some sort of,
they're not the target. Nobody is, right? I mean, they think nobody is.
It's a range of industries. It's a range of size of companies, because especially with ransom, it's whoever they think will pay. And so if they get into your systems and all of a sudden they realize that you have insurance coverage, sorry, Maya, that covers ransom up to $20 million, then all of a sudden they're like, hey, this is a potential payday. So sometimes actually going after the smaller company that has more insurance coverage is really beneficial for a hacker, because that company may not be as prepared and may feel like, hey, these guys are going to be covered, so they're more likely to pay. Why don't we go after them? And then let's say it's a small company that's part of a larger.
You're on, Maya, after this, yes.
No.
I know to respond. That's good.
Point, I've never seen a 20 million limit for payments, but
I have. It was interesting, actually. I was surprised.
Let me close it down in terms of, I think both the sides are still in very, very early formative stages, right? And that is what we are trying to solve. Andrea and Maya both know for the last 3 years we have been trying to see how we can stabilize that aspect, because insurance is a accepted proper risk mitigation management tool, but the insurance industry cannot survive if we don't have the right combination of regulation, policy, as well as the right incentives to buy them. And we have been, as CFF community members, have been in the middle of this discussion. I think from some of the early public judicial aspects as well, right? You don't want to take it to court of law and set a precedent that the insurance industry cannot really pay for at the later half. So I think very active decision. or discussion that I would want you to take forward. Not probably solvable in the next 6 or so minutes we got. So so I'll take the moderator's prerogative here, and thank you for very engaged discussion. Something that I want to leave with beyond risk and resilience is, I mean, I am the odd man out in this particular, literally the odd man out in this panel. And I have not put it deliberately, but I'm so glad this came out this way. And probably you can guess what I'm going to ask for is, how did you get here, right? I mean, how can we get in terms of diversity and women in cyber and that particular aspect done? And I ask this because, all of this has been such a, cyber has been such a negative discussion, right? So it cannot really excite people to come and take on this career. And as far as I know, none of you actually started with a career in cyber, right? And you started somewhere and ended up where you have been extremely accretive and impactful in your own roles. So maybe we just go Andrea, Maya, Siobhan, and Denise in that order to get a sense of how can we get more leadership to your roles in the coming days, and probably young people who can join us in this journey, right? So, Andrea, sorry to change the whole discussion, but I think this is important.
Oh, but I think this is part
Exactly
of cyber
right,
resilience
right?
building.
The future of cyber.
Having the right people. And I think a point that we haven't made, that many of us have made in the past, is that it takes a village to solve the cyber problem. It takes all kinds of people, not just technologists, but also lawyers and scientists and data privacy people. And, everybody has to be looking at the problem so that the 360 can be solved. So I come from a background of starting as a lawyer, but then moving into executive roles in corporate responsibility and ethics, and then this whole ESG world. And I did have a role overseeing information security in one of the companies where I was an executive. And that's what got me involved with this. And then I realized this is a very difficult strategic risk that I want to wrap my head around and see how I can help. And my perspective is culture, leadership, risk, and resilience, but other people bring other things. So I encourage all young people to bring whatever talents they have, and if this is where they want to be, they will have something to offer. So that would be my thought.
Great, excellent. Maya, your thoughts, please.
Actually, Andrea took the words out of my mouth. It's so multifaceted. Even if I look at my own team, right, it's totally different backgrounds, totally different careers to that point. And I think this is what this is about, because it's a real life in the middle of everything topic that we are dealing with here, right? And so it's basically a picture, or a black and white picture of reality. So there are so many facets to it that you need this diversity and those different school of thoughts as well to get a handle on it. So yes, I think everybody can contribute actually, if super actively in making that a career, or passively in becoming an own cyber defender of your own environment or the company you work for. Is actually both is necessary.
Excellent. Thank you, Maya. Thank you. Siobhan, your thoughts.
Well, Andrea and Maya, I think there's actually broad concurrence here that sort of as the aperture around cyber has opened, that it's seen as a broader business issue that creates a lot more avenues for people to make a contribution, right? And so that's going to make it easier for people from a variety of backgrounds and callings, so to speak, to make that contribution. You're right, Val. I didn't expect that I would suddenly become so focused on cyber as part of my career. I was a reporter covering national security issues post 9/11, and actually, as we saw this transition in government as well, a lot of people who had focused on counterterrorism found themselves suddenly focused on cybersecurity. And I think that there were an analogous set of issues there, even though the actual threats were quite different. And I was covering the National Security Agency as part of my beat when I was at the Baltimore Sun, and they were obviously very focused on what was not even necessarily thought of as cybersecurity at the time. So I kind of came in through it backwards that way, just covering the National Security Agency and a lot of what they were up to. And that ultimately led to a fairly long view into the cyber issues.
Excellent. It's a good point. Thank you, Siobhan. And Denise, please.
I think many points have been made about the diverse environment and making sure that people have different skill sets and different mindsets. So I'm not going to really talk about that too much. I was an English major, I've been a writer. I've done all those kinds of things. I've had a myriad positions in various different industries, even cleaning, for example. I was an editor for a cleaning magazine at one point in time. So I basically would say that anyone that's looking for a career, having good basic general skill sets and being able to learn quickly on the fly and understand and listen, right? Listen is really important. And then I don't underestimate the role of mentors. There's been a number of points in my life where I had somebody pluck me and put me somewhere that created that fabric of my career. So, whenever you could be a mentor to someone and be a role model or an example, I think it's really important, and we need to be very mindful of that, especially in the security world, where we see people and help them grow.
Absolutely, no, great point. What a way to close this this penultimate hour. Risk and resilience, something that we need to really care about, and from bottom up, top down, doesn't matter. Everybody has to participate in this. And thank you for opening the hour with the ESG plus T discussion. Siobhan, thank you for sharing your expertise on the communication and crisis management, as well as your background on this area as we came towards. Denise, thank you for joining us again. I know what you're going through. We had a little bit of break time Wednesday, so it started there, but hopefully, we'll all go through this. This is a resiliency and crisis management in action. Thank you all. We'll pivot over for the audience, we're going to pivot over to our closing hour. We're going to look at what do you want CFF to be in 2025? How do we shape our next 5 years? We'll do a little bit of look back on this summit, and then we'll go talk about and plan for the next 5 years. So thank you so much, panelists, and thank you all audience. We will see you in the next session. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.